My name is Lena Whitmore. I'm 33, and for 5 years I didn't speak to my parents. Then I made one mistake. I brought my husband home to meet them. It was my grandmother's 82nd birthday, so I drove back to the town that raised me. At the table, my father asked my husband in front of everyone what he did for a living. Ethan said he taught high school history. My father laughed, a real, open laugh, over the pot roast, in front of the whole family. "A teacher," he said. "You babysit other people's kids for pennies." The table went dead silent. My husband didn't argue. He nodded once, slow, and reached for his water like nothing had happened. But I knew that nod. Remember it, because that was the only thing my husband did that night. 2 days later, he walked back into that house and set something on the table that made my father go silent in a way I've never seen a man go silent. And what came through that front door behind him, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Welcome to Quiet Reckonings, the channel where the ones who never raise their voice finally get heard. If a story like this has ever found you at the right moment, you belong here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe, because I did not see this ending coming, and neither will you. Ethan and I live in a narrow house on the edge of Millhaven, with a porch that leans a little and a kitchen that's always warm. I work nights as an ER nurse. Ethan teaches American history, and has for 15 years. Most evenings he grades papers until midnight, a cold coffee forgotten at his elbow. His phone buzzes constantly, and it's never spam, it's kids. Former students, current ones, some a decade out of his classroom. They text him when they get into college and when they don't. One young man texts him every year on the anniversary of his father's death, just to say thank you for staying late that winter. Ethan answers everyone. He never mentions it. I've watched him talk a terrified 16-year-old down at 2 in the morning, then get up at 6 to teach the Civil War on a coffee he forgot to drink. He is the calmest human being I have ever known. In 4 years of marriage, I'd seen him truly rattled exactly twice. My father managed it in a single sentence, over pot roast, in front of my entire family. And what frightened me wasn't the insult, it was how easily Ethan let it slide off him, like a man who'd been called worse and survived it easily. He had. I just didn't yet understand how much of his life had been spent underestimated, or how many people were waiting for the chance to remind my father of that. Walter Graves grew up with nothing, and never forgave the world for it. He built a construction empire from one truck and a bad back, and by the time I was in high school he had money, a big house, and a wall of awards he polished himself. He measured people by what they'd eventually earn. When I told him at 19 I wanted to be a nurse, he didn't ask if I'd be happy. He asked what a nurse made a year, then made a face I still remember. "So you want to spend your life cleaning up after strangers?" My mother, Diane, agreed with him, the way she agreed with everything he said. I paid my own way through nursing school, night classes, double shifts, a car that died twice. My father called it stubbornness. I called it the only clean thing I owned. For a long time I still wanted him proud of me. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners, kept swallowing his comments, kept hoping this would be the year he finally said, "Good job, kid." It never came. 5 years ago, something happened at that same table that made me stop hoping. I packed my things and stopped answering his calls. I'll tell you what happened, but not yet. First you need to know why, after 5 years of silence, I ever agreed to walk back through that door. Lena Graves is my father's mother and nothing like him. Sharp, funny, allergic to showing off. She wore the same coat for 20 years and gave the difference to the church. She was the only one who never let go of me, a card every month, just a line or two. "Thinking of you, the garden misses you, still here." Then one October she called instead of writing, her voice thinner than I remembered. "Lena, honey, I'm turning 82. I'd like to see you before I don't get the chance, and I'd very much like to meet the man who married my granddaughter." I stood in my kitchen and couldn't speak. "Your father will behave," she said, which we both knew was a hope, not a promise. Then, strangely, "There are things about this family you don't know yet, sweetheart. Come home and I'll tell you some of them." I asked what she meant. She only laughed, soft and tired. "Bring your husband, he'll understand more of it than you think." I said yes. I hung up and found Ethan, and told him we were going back to the place I swore I'd never return to. He didn't hesitate. I told him everything about my father over dinner, bracing for him to talk me out of it. He just listened, then said, Let's give your grandmother her birthday. I planned it like a woman going into weather. Booked a room at the inn under my own name, paid in advance. Told Ethan the exit strategy out loud so it would feel real. If it turns ugly, we leave. We don't argue, we don't perform, we just go. He repeated it back to me, word for word, a thing he does when he wants me to know he's heard me. He asked only one question. Does your father know what I do for a living? I said no, it never came up in 5 years of silence. He nodded slowly, filing it away. Then let him ask, he said. I thought he was being polite. I had no idea my father was about to hand my husband the exact question that would take our whole family apart and put it back together completely wrong for him. The Graves estate sits behind a gate my father installed just to have a gate. There were maybe 20 of us at the birthday dinner, aunts, cousins, my mother floating in pearls, and Gerald Voss, my father's oldest business partner, seated like family. Lena sat at the far end, small and bright-eyed, watching everything. Ethan shook every hand and remembered every name. For a while it was almost fine, then my father tapped his glass. So, Ethan, he said, loud enough for the room, Lena never tells us anything. What is it you do? I teach high school history, Ethan said. 15 years now. My father smiled, and I knew that smile, and my stomach dropped. A teacher. He looked around the table, gathering his audience. You babysit kids for pennies. Someone laughed, then stopped. My mother examined her napkin. The whole table went silent, the silverware suddenly loud against the plates. I opened my mouth. Under the table, Ethan's hand found my knee, not to stop me, to steady me. He nodded once at my father, calm as a lake with no wind. That's one way to put it, he said, and took a slow sip of water. My father had wanted a fight and didn't get one, which only made him louder. But I wasn't watching him anymore. I was watching my grandmother. Lena had gone still, her eyes darkened, watching her son like she was seeing something she'd hoped was gone. My father recovered the room the way he always does, by talking about himself. He walked Ethan past the wall of awards, telling the story behind each one, the number attached to it. Then he stopped at his favorite. And this one is my donation to the Millhaven Scholarship Fund. Biggest gift they got that year. Even I give back, you know. He said it like giving was a strange hobby he'd tried once. Everyone in town knew that fund. For 10 years, some anonymous donor had quietly paid tuition for kids who couldn't afford it, the town's favorite mystery. My father loved being near it, made his one visible donation, and let people wonder if he might be the secret angel. He wasn't, but he liked the doubt. My mother drifted over. Lena's a nurse, she told Ethan in her bad weather voice. We keep hoping she'll do something with herself. Ethan smiled at her, unbothered. She saves lives at 2 a.m. I'd call that something. My mother had no answer, so she laughed and changed the subject. I looked at Ethan, calm beside my father's trophies, and had the strangest feeling, like that wall was bragging to the wrong audience. Like somewhere in this town was a bigger story my father had never bothered to learn. We left before dessert. In the car I finally let go. I'm so sorry, I should never have brought you into that. Ethan watched the dark road. Lena, I've been called worse by 14-year-olds before lunch, it's fine. I laughed because he wanted me to, but it didn't reach my chest. It's not fine, he doesn't even know you. No, he agreed. He doesn't. Something in how he said it made me glance over. He wasn't hurt, wasn't angry. He looked like a man who decided something and wasn't ready to say it yet. You could have told him, I said. You just sat there. He turned to me, gentle in the passing streetlights. Telling him wouldn't have changed his mind. Men like your father don't believe words, they believe evidence. I didn't know yet what evidence he meant. I only knew something had shifted in the seat beside me. My whole life I'd begged my father to see me. That night, watching my husband stay calm while my father tried to shrink him, I felt the begging finally burn out of me. I was done waiting for Walter Graves to change. That was the night I started planning what I'd do instead. I need to tell you what happened in that same dining room 5 years earlier. I was 28, still trying. My father threw a family dinner and invited Gerald Voss and his son Brett, arranging the whole evening like a merger. Brett was set to inherit the firm, and my father wanted Graves' blood married into it. He decided all of this without asking me. Halfway through the meal, he stood, toasted to the future of both F. Families, and put his hand on my shoulder like I was in a signed contract. I stood up and said, gently, that I wasn't interested, that I had my own plans. His face changed in front of everyone. Your own plans, bedpans and a boy with no name. I raised you better than this. He told the table I was throwing my life away. I stood there 28, being auctioned and insulted in the same breath. I put down my napkin. Then I'll take my life somewhere you don't have to watch, I said, and left. 5 years of silence started at that table, which is exactly why watching him do the same thing to the man I actually married lit something in me that 5 years of quiet had only banked, not put out. The next morning we got breakfast at the diner. The waitress stopped dead. Mr. Bradley, it's me, Wanda. My boy is Cody. You kept him in school junior year when his dad went to prison. You drove him yourself. She had to set the coffee pot down. He's at community college now, first one in our family. She squeezed Ethan's shoulder and hurried off so we wouldn't see her cry. It kept happening. A man at the register. Morning, Mr. B, a woman by the door, mouthing thank you. A driver rolling down his window to shout that his daughter got a scholarship. Ethan waved back, remembering every name. I sat there and watched a whole town greet my husband like he mattered. In my father's own town, everyone seemed to know Ethan. Everyone except my father. I thought about the wall of trophies, and then about Wanda setting down her coffee pot to keep from crying. Something started to take shape in my mind. If my father only believed in evidence, maybe it was time someone showed him the real ledger, not with a speech, with people. That afternoon my mother called. Your father feels terrible, she said, in a voice too smooth to be true. He wants to make it right. Come to a real family dinner, just us, 2 days from now. I knew what just us meant. Gerald again, another audience, another performance. My father didn't want to apologize, he wanted a rematch. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Please, Lena, she said. You've already broken this family once, don't do it again over a joke. I was about to say no. Ethan, folding laundry beside me, had heard everything. He shook his head slow, then mouthed one word, go. I covered the phone. Why? He set down the shirt. Because he asked what a teacher does. Let's go answer him, give me 2 days. So I told my mother we'd come. Trust me, Ethan said. And God help me, I did. But I wasn't going to sit still for 2 days. That night in the hospital break room, I told Dr. Nora Whitfield the whole story. When I got to my husband, she stopped writing. Ethan Bradley, history teacher, tall, dry humor, I stared. You know him. Lena, that man is the reason I'm a doctor. I was going to drop out at 16. My mom was sick, I was working nights. Mr. Bradley told me I was too smart to quit and made sure I didn't. She shook her head. I sent him my white coat photo the day I matched. He wrote back a whole page. I asked carefully, if I told you my father called Ethan a babysitter who works for pennies, what would you say? Her face went flat and hard. I'd say your father should meet the people that babysitter raised. Would you come say it to his face, 2 days from now at dinner? She didn't blink. Text me the address. I drove home and started a list on the back of a receipt. Before I left the lot, Nora knocked on my window. You know about the scholarship fund, right? The anonymous one. 10 years, some persons paid tuition for I don't know how many kids. No name, no credit. I always figured it was somebody rich. I drove home slower than I needed to because something was turning over in my mind and I didn't like how it fit. For as long as I'd known him, Ethan had been strangely careful with money. We had enough, but never quite as much as 2 salaries should leave. He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. I'd once found a stack of blank envelopes in his desk, and a bank slip I didn't understand, and he just said, bills, and kissed my forehead. I'd let it go. I sat in our driveway with the engine ticking, doing the math, and I didn't quite believe it. It was too big, too quiet, too exactly like him. I had no proof, but I knew where he kept the things that mattered. The next afternoon, looking for a sweater in the back of our closet, I would find the answer. The box was on the top shelf, soft at the corners with age. I only pulled it down thinking it held old scarves. Instead I found letters, hundreds of them, some typed, most in the wobbly handwriting of teenagers, some 15 years old. I sat down on the closet floor and couldn't stop reading. You are the only adult who ever believed me. I didn't hurt myself junior year because of you. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. That's yours as much as mine. Thank you for the coat. Thank you. You for pretending you didn't notice I hadn't eaten. I was crying before I reached the bottom of the first stack. Under the letters was a thick folder of bank records, transfers, going back 10 years. each made out to the Millhaven Scholarship Fund, each signed in Ethan's steady hand under one typed word: Anonymous. My husband was the town's secret angel. The man my father called Pennies had quietly given away more of himself than my father had ever earned in trophies, for a decade, without a single moment of applause. I sat on that closet floor and finally understood why he'd stayed so calm at that table. He didn't need my father to know his worth. He already knew, and had decided that mattered more than being right. I put every letter back exactly as I'd found it. I didn't put the box back on the shelf, though, because in 2 days, my father was going to ask again what a teacher does, and I had just found the answer. If you've ever watched someone you love get judged for their paycheck instead of their heart, you already know why my hands were shaking on that closet floor. Stay with me. What happened at that second dinner isn't what you expect. And if this is hitting home right now, subscribe, so it can find someone else who needs it tonight. That evening I told him quietly, "Ethan, I found the letters and the bank records." He was at the sink and his hands went still. When he turned around, he wasn't angry, he looked almost shy. "You weren't supposed to find those." "Why keep it secret, from me, from everyone?" He dried his hands slowly. "Because giving isn't giving anymore once you send someone a bill for it. The second people know, it stops being for them and starts being for you." He sat across from me. "My dad was a carpenter, built half the pews in our church, never put his name on any of them, used to say the work is the signature." He shrugged. "Somebody helped me when I was a broke kid who wanted to teach. I promised I'd pass it on quiet, so I did." I took his hand. "You let my father humiliate you, you could have leveled him with one sentence." "I could have," he agreed, "but those kids' stories aren't mine to spend to win an argument." I understood him completely and loved him more than ever. But I also made a decision I didn't tell him about. He was right not to brag. But the town's story wasn't only his to keep quiet anymore, either. Those kids were grown now, and if they wanted to answer my father themselves, that was their choice. I just had to open the door. I had 2 days and I used them. While Ethan taught, I drove all over Millhaven doing the one thing my father never would. I asked people about a teacher. Sheriff Dean Ruiz, big and quiet, his jaw working. Mr. Bradley sat with me every day the year my dad walked out. I'd have gone bad without him. What time's dinner? Marcus Doyle, who now owns the biggest lumber yard in the county. Mr. B wrote the letter that got me my first loan. Bank turned me down twice. I've hired 40 people since. We'll be there. Representative Priya Anand, 29, just won a state seat. My mother cleaned houses. Mr. Bradley paid for the test prep we couldn't afford, never asked for a thing back. Tell me where to be. I didn't have to push a single one of them. I just said my father's words, babysitter, pennies, and watched each of them go quiet, then hard, then certain. By the second evening, the list had spilled across 3 more receipts. I drove home terrified and sure at once. My father wanted a dinner. He was about to get one he'd remember for the rest of his life. That night my mother called to confirm. "Wear something nice. And please, Lena, don't make a scene. You were always so dramatic." There it was, the word she'd used my whole life to describe the moments I told the truth. Then she surprised me, her voice dropped. "You know, I wanted to be a teacher once, before your father, kindergarten." She caught herself and the pearls went back on. "But that's no life, your father was right about that." And she hung up before I could answer. I sat with the phone in my lap, feeling, for one strange moment, sorry for her. She'd buried a whole self to keep the peace, and called it wisdom ever since. But sympathy isn't surrender. I remembered every time she watched my father cut me down and said nothing. Later, I told Ethan I was scared. What if I'm becoming him, ambushing people, making a scene? Maybe I really am the dramatic one. He took my face in both hands. "You're not exposing me. You're not making a scene. You're opening a door. Every person who walks through it walks on their own. That's just what happens when a town finally gets to speak." The morning of the dinner, Lena asked me to come by early. "I know what your Ethan does," she said, setting down her shears. "Ran into him at the bank mailing one of his envelopes. He turned red as a beet and begged me not to tell, so I didn't." She patted my hand. "But I've been waiting a long time to watch my son learn something he can't buy." Her eyes were wet and fierce. "Your father isn't a bad man, Lena, he's a frightened one. He grew up with nothing and decided money was the one thing that couldn't leave him. He looks at your husband and doesn't see a teacher, he sees a man who isn't afraid of being poor. That terrifies him. She squeezed my hand. Let them come, sweetheart. Your father needs to hear it from the town. He won't hear it from you or Ethan, but he might hear it from 40 of his neighbors standing in his own dining room. I'll be in the good chair, where I can watch his face. Ethan had his own preparations. That afternoon he set the box on the kitchen table, chose a few letters carefully, then reached to the bottom and pulled out a certificate wrapped in plastic, State Teacher of the Year, his name in gold, dated 6 years back. I'd never seen it. You never even hung it up, I said. Felt like bragging, he said, and slid it into the box. What are you bringing it for? Your father asked what a teacher does. Rude but fair, I'm just going to answer it honestly. He tucked the box under his arm. Never done this before, shown anyone, but he asked in front of your whole family, so I'll answer the same way. I didn't tell him about the 40 people already driving toward that house. I wanted him to walk in as himself. I kissed him. Whatever happens tonight, I already know what you're worth. He smiled. So do about 300 kids, he said, then went red, and I laughed for the first time in 2 days. An hour before we left, my father called, brisk as a foreman. Tell your teacher to dress properly. Gerald's coming, and his boy Brett runs the whole firm now. Wouldn't hurt for you to see what your options were, in case you ever get tired of pennies. 5 years and here he was, still trying to trade me like lumber. Anything else, Dad? I said evenly. Just don't embarrass us, this family has a reputation. I almost laughed. He had no idea what this town actually thought or of whom. Don't worry, Dad, I said. By the end of the night, everyone will know exactly what this family is. He took that as agreement. Good girl, he said and hung up. I stood in my kitchen and let the last of my hesitation drain away. That phone call cured me of it entirely. Whatever happened tonight, he had earned it. I picked up my coat and we drove east. In the car, my phone kept buzzing, and not all of it was good. Nora might get pulled into a trauma. Sheriff Ruiz wasn't sure he could get off shift. 2 others sent apologies. Priya had a late vote. One by one, certain things turned into maybes, and the whole plan wobbled beneath me. I pulled over on the shoulder, hazards ticking, and told Ethan the truth. I invited people, your kids, grown now, to come tonight and tell him who you are. Half of them can't make it. I think I've ruined everything. He wasn't angry. He put the car back in drive, his hand over mine. Even if not one person comes, we walk in with our heads up. We eat dinner, we're polite, we go home to our own good life. He smiled. The people are a gift, they're not the point, you are. Whatever waited, 3 people or 30, I was walking in beside the best man I knew. The dining room was set like a magazine. Gerald Voss was already there, Brett beside him in a suit that cost more than our mortgage. My father sat at the head beneath his wall of awards. Eleanor sat in the good chair, watching. Ethan set his box quietly by the sideboard. My father smirked. Bring your lunch? A few chuckled. Ethan just smiled and pulled out my chair. For a few minutes it was almost normal. My mother narrated the menu. My father held court about a job he'd won, the number at the center like always. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing under the table, listening past him, toward the front of the house. Picture that long table, my father certain he'd already won, glass raised for a toast. He had no idea, because just as he lifted it, the doorbell rang. If you're rooting for my husband right now, tell me in the comments. And now let me tell you who was on that porch. My mother frowned. Are we expecting someone? Probably a delivery, my father said. Sit. It wasn't a delivery. Dr. Nora Whitfield stepped in, still in her hospital badge, holding a pie. So sorry to intrude, I'm a friend of the family. She crossed straight to Ethan. Mr. Bradley, I don't know if you remember me. His face changed for the first time all night. Nora Whitfield, of course I remember you, you're a doctor now. Because of him, she said, turning to my father. My mother was dying, I was ready to quit at 16. This man drove to my house and wouldn't let me. My father blinked. That's very nice, but we're in the middle of. The doorbell rang again. Sheriff Ruiz, hat in hand. He gripped Ethan's hand, then turned to my father. You don't know me, sir, but this man sat with me every day the year my father left. I carry a badge, instead of a grudge, because of him. My father's smile was slipping now. Lena, he said slowly, what is this? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang a 3rd time, then a 4th, then it didn't stop. They came in a river. Marcus Doyle filling the doorway in flannel. Priya Anand, who'd left her vote and driven 2 hours. Wanda from the diner still in her apron, her son Cody by the sleeve, a nurse, a kindergarten teacher, a firefighter, a pastor, twins who ran the hardware store. Far more than I'd dared hope, filling the hallway, pressing against the wall of awards until you couldn't see the frames. They were quiet. Nobody shouted. They just stood there, looking at Ethan with a kind of love my father had never once earned in that house. My father stood up, looked around at 40 neighbors filling his dining room, and failed, visibly, to understand any of it. His face went red, then purple. "What in God's name is this? Who let all these people into my house?" Nobody answered. They hadn't come for him. I stood up, every eye turned to me, then my father's. "Lena, you explain this right now." I wasn't shaking anymore. "Sit down, Dad," I said quietly. "Some people came to answer your question." He didn't sit. I kept my voice low, the way I speak to frightened patients at 3 a.m. 2 days ago. "You asked my husband what a teacher does. You called him a babysitter. You said he works for pennies. You said it in front of everyone and laughed." I turned to the room. "These are some of his students. They drove here on their own. If anyone wants to tell my father what Ethan Bradley does, the floor is yours." Priya stepped forward first. "Mr. Graves, I'm a state representative. My mother cleaned houses. Mr. Bradley paid for my test prep and never mentioned it again. I write laws now. That's what a teacher does." Sheriff Ruiz, "He kept me out of a cell. I drive a cruiser instead." Marcus, "His letter got me a loan 2 banks refused. I employ 40 of your neighbors. That's what a teacher does." One by one, each ending the same way like a chorus. "That's what a teacher does." My father's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in his life, I watched Walter Graves have nothing to say. Then he found his footing the only way he knew: contempt. He slammed his palm on the table. "This is a setup, an ambush in my own house. Did she pay you people?" Nobody flinched. That undid him more than anything. Marcus answered into the silence. "Nobody paid us, Mr. Graves. We came because of something you don't know." He glanced at Ethan, already shaking his head. "You've got a certificate on that wall, sir, your donation to the scholarship fund. You've bragged about it for years." "What of it?" "The funds had an anonymous donor for 10 years. Paid tuition for I don't know how many kids. A few of us found out by accident and he begged us not to tell, so we didn't." Marcus's voice thickened. "It's him, Mr. Graves. It's been Ethan the whole time. The teacher you called Pennies has put more kids through school than anyone in this county." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father, who had once framed a single donation and let the town wonder if he was the secret angel, understood the angel had been sitting at his table the whole time. His face drained from purple to gray. He tried once more. "So he gives away a teacher's salary, a few dollars to feel important. It's still pennies. Charity is what people do when they can't build anything real." Ethan stood. He crossed to the sideboard, set the box in the middle of the table, and opened it. Letters, handful after handful, across the good china. The certificate, gold catching candlelight. The bank folder, open, the total visible. My father looked down at a number bigger than the one he'd bragged about for a decade. "You asked what 15 years add up to," Ethan said, quiet as a closing door. "You called it pennies." He looked my father dead in the eye. "The pennies added up." The room was silent. My father's hands trembled. He had no number left to throw back. For the first time in his life, he'd been outmatched in the only currency he'd ever believed in, by a man he'd tried to shrink into nothing. And everyone in that room knew it. He turned on me next. "You did this. You brought these people to humiliate your own father. You've always been so dramatic, but this—" "Stop." I said it quiet and final, and he stopped. "I didn't do this to humiliate you. I invited them, but not one came for you. They came for him." I walked to Ethan's side. "You spent your whole life counting money, Dad. He spent his counting kids. I came back for Grandma, and so you could see who I chose, not to prove anything. I stopped needing that 5 years ago at this very table. You don't have to respect him, but you will never mock my husband in front of me again, and you will never offer me to Gerald's son like property. If you can't manage that, you won't see me. It's that simple." Dee waited my whole life to say those words, and I said them without heat, without tears, without an ounce of the drama he'd always accused me of. Then I let the silence belong to him. My father didn't apologize. He didn't crumble. That's not who he is. He looked around at 40 neighbors watching him lose, and his fear curdled back into anger. "Get out," he said, low and ugly. All of you, this is a circus. Nobody argued. They'd already said what they came to say. One by one, they filed past, each touching Ethan's shoulder on the way, the whole town saying goodnight to the man my father had called worthless 3 days earlier. My mother stood frozen, then crossed to my father's side and took his arm, her one brief moment of remembering who she might have been already folding back into 60 years of keeping the peace. Lena rose last, pressed her hand to Ethan's cheek. Now they know, she said. Then, to her son, without yelling, without crying, your father built the pews in that church and never signed one. I always hoped some of him made it into you. She walked out on my arm, past the wall of awards, into the cool night, leaving my father alone with the ruins of the only proof he'd ever believed in. We didn't stay in Millhaven long. No dramatic reconciliation, I didn't want a fake one. Ethan packed the letters back into the box, careful as always, and we drove home to our leaning porch and warm kitchen. In the weeks after, some things changed and most didn't. My father never apologized, but my grandmother told me a month later that he'd asked her, gruff and cornered, whether the town really thought that much of him, of Ethan. She said yes. He went quiet for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It was the closest a man like him gets to one, and I decided that was his business, not mine. I kept visiting my grandmother, bringing soup, sitting in her garden. I never went back to my father's table, and he never asked me to. For the first time, that absence felt like peace instead of a wound. Ethan kept teaching, kept driving that terrible truck. Somewhere in the county, envelopes still arrived at the scholarship fund with no name attached, because the town kept his secret even after they'd spilled it, out of respect for a man who never wanted the credit. Nothing about how Millhaven saw my husband changed that night. They'd always known. The only person who needed to learn it was my father, and whether he ever truly did is up to him now. As for me, I stopped waiting. A few months later, Ethan and I decided we were ready to raise a child of our own, in a house where a person's worth would never be measured in dollars. I used to think respect was something you begged from the people who raised you, that if you were good enough, quiet enough, patient enough, they'd finally hand it over. But it isn't a thing anyone hands you at all. It's what a whole town gives a quiet man who never asked for it, and it's what you finally give yourself, the day you stop asking the one person who was never going to say it. That's my story. 5 years of silence, one cruel sentence at a dinner table, and a whole town that answered when my father wouldn't. If there's someone in your life who measures people by their paycheck instead of their heart, take this as your sign to stop asking them for permission to be proud of who you love. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.